Mr. Speaker, sir, I support the motion of thanks to the President. I was here in this House 5 years ago, but seated in the gallery as a civil servant, watching from the sidelines rather than participating in the debate. I still remember the then President warning that the global environment would change rapidly and often unpredictably. I don't know what Mr. Naden had in mind when he said those words, but I don't think he or anyone in this House then could have anticipated what happened in the ensuing years. Globally, we lived through the biggest bank bailout in history and the deepest recession since the global depression. Singapore, too, suffered its worst recession since independence. Understandably, this roller coaster ride caused anxieties for many Singaporeans. I've talked to many residents, first during the general election and then over the last few months in my house visits and Meet the People sessions. One experience with a 60-year-old resident stood out. I first met him shortly after I was elected as a Member of Parliament. My helpers warned me that this was going to be a difficult case. I looked at his case file. It was very thick. He had been coming to the MPS since 2009 when he lost his job as a driver. Since then, he had been looking for a job, but without any success. He was angry and he lost his temper easily. But the anger stemmed from a deep sense of despair, hurt, and hopelessness. I continued to see him several times over the past few months and provided him with temporary assistance through ComCare and NTUC vouchers. I also encouraged him to apply for a taxi license because I found out that he had driven a taxi some years back. Well, recently he came to see me again, and this time he looked like a completely transformed person with a new lease of life. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, and his hair was properly combed for the first time. He then took out a freshly minted taxi license from his pocket and showed it to me. The pride and joy was visible on his face, and I was delighted for him. Now, this resident is still not out of the woods. He has just started driving, needs to earn enough money to pay off his outstanding debts, and so he still has lingering anxieties and concerns about the future. And there are probably many others like him, people who have gone through the roller coaster ride of the last 5 years. They do not feel that their lives have improved, and they worry about the unexpected twists and turns that may lie ahead. They see prices and bills going up, and they worry about their future and their children's future. I fully empathize with these sentiments, and our hearts go out to all those who need help. The government is taking steps to strengthen our social safety nets, to look after the lower income, the disabled, and the elderly. We are working with the many helping hands in the community to make sure that no one falls through the cracks. We have and will continue to do all we can to address the strains and stresses that people feel on the ground. Now, some members of this House have suggested that the problems we face today are the results of the government's focus on growth. I think the suggestion is completely disingenuous. To begin with, the government has never pursued GDP as an end in itself. Rather, growth has been pursued with a firm commitment to fairness and as a foundation for broader benefits for all, the provision of equal opportunity, greater social mobility, and a quality of life that improves with each generation. The criticisms against growth are not uniquely heard in this House. They are also heard in other developed countries, where growth becomes tainted by the excesses of capitalism and financial markets. But they have arisen more fundamentally due to the pressures in the workplace brought about by globalization and the IT revolution. In the past, competition came from low-wage, low-skilled workers. Now, there is also competition from low-wage, high-skilled workers. Reading X-rays or filing tax returns can be done by lower-paid radiologists or accountants. They simply do the work in India and send the results back the next day via fiber optic cable. When Applied Materials, a US-based solar panel company, decided to build the world's largest commercial solar R&D center, it chose Xi'an, China as a location. Applied Materials had openings for 260 scientists or technologists jobs. It received 26,000 applications, 100 times more than there were openings. And 30% of the people eventually hired had masters or PhDs. In this highly connected and interdependent world, there is a wider polarization of jobs and employment opportunities. Those who do well are the ones who can think critically, who can tackle complex, non-routine tasks, and who can come up with creative, innovative ideas. All others are vulnerable to outsourcing or automation. And this is contributing to rising income gaps around the world. And this is at least partly why there is widespread social malaise and discontent manifesting itself in protests and street demonstrations in some countries. These are the realities of what is happening around us. Singapore is not immune from these global pressures, but we are in a much stronger position than other countries, and this is in large part because of the measures taken by the government. And we have to look at these measures in the context of the economic cycles over the past decade. In the first half of the decade, it was a very difficult period for Singapore, for the world, and for us. We had 2 recessions. Overall growth was very slow. And the impact of all these was felt on our people, on ordinary Singaporeans. The common core then, if members would recall, was about jobs. Median incomes in the first half was flat, real terms. At the 20th percentile, it dropped by 11%. Then the second half came, and at the beginning of the second half, we could see the opportunities because we could see the external environment improving. And we took full advantage of these opportunities. This meant more foreign workers. It meant bringing in more investments. But ultimately, it meant creating more jobs for our people. In doing so, it's true that we ran into some infrastructure bottlenecks in transport, in hospitals, in housing. Now, we could have decided not to seize the opportunities and to leave things be. But these opportunities come in cycles. If we had failed to seize the opportunities then, our people, Singaporeans, will be worse off today. But because we did what we did, at that time, Singaporeans benefited. And if you look at the second half of the decade, median incomes rose in real terms by 11%, from flat in the first half to 11% in the second half. At the 20th percentile, real incomes rose sharply, even more sharply, by 13%, from a drop of 11% in the first half to increase of 13% in the second half. Overall, our economic growth for the whole decade was 5.6%, hardly the outcome of a grow-at-all-costs policy. It was the government steering the economy through economic storms. We achieved decent growth, and by doing so, we created jobs, we raised incomes, and we did good for the people. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have taken some time to go through the details of what happened through the last decade, because listening to some of the points that were made earlier by members, I don't think a full picture was given to members and to Singaporeans. Earlier, Mr. Gerald Jam and Mr. Chen Shao Mao spoke about the value of diversity, about different views, and about constructive debate in the House and not scoring political points. I fully agree with them, and I share these views. I hope, therefore, that members of the Workers' Party will look at the data and the facts of what happened over the past decade, to appreciate the hard trade-offs that we face, and to understand the basis of the decisions that were made. And perhaps if Mr. Giam does that, I hope he will be persuaded that what happened in the last 10 years was not the PAP's biggest policy failure, as he put it, but the PAP's success in steering Singapore through difficult times and doing good for our people. The facts, if you look at what happened in the last decade, are that very few other countries have emerged from that period of global turmoil with the kind of positive result that Singapore did. We made it happen because of the government working for the people, because of our policies to promote sustainable and inclusive growth, growth that benefits every citizen, strengthens social solidarity, and increases living standards, not just for today, but for future generations as well. And this is the way to build a fair, just, and inclusive Singapore, and indeed to stay true to our founding ideals and achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation. We want to be a nation where every citizen has a place, where every contribution is valued, where all can live in dignity and harmony. We also want to be a gracious, caring, and compassionate society. For the strength of any society is measured by how well it treats its weakest members. And as Singapore progresses, we must ensure that our vulnerable members are not left behind.